Welcome to Applied Intelligence, a conversation at the intersection of people, technology, and getting stuff done. And now, here's your host, Imteaz Ahmed.
Hi everyone, welcome to Applied Intelligence. Today I have a dear friend, Brian Davis, joining me. Brian's currently the Director of Technology at LSU. He joins me from sunny Louisiana. I've actually only known Brian for a couple of days. We met last year when he was running Startup Bus USA, which is something we share in common. A love for startups, a love for competitions, a love for helping people build solutions. So we're going to have a fascinating conversation. I'm really looking forward to it. Welcome to the show, Brian.
Yeah, thank you, Imteaz. I'm super excited to be here. I definitely appreciate the invite.
Super cool. So this is a question I love to ask. I typically ask this in interviews, so I'm going to put you on the spot.
Okay.
What's your story and how did you get to where you are? And to give you more context, the question I typically ask in an interview is, if you had to write an autobiography for yourself and it only had 5 chapters, what would the chapter titles of each one of those chapters be?
Okay. Yeah, that's a great question. Let's see. I think the chapter one would be achievement. So, like I said, I'm from Louisiana, I'm born and raised, a little city in North Louisiana. And there, sports is a very huge thing. Everyone plays sports, and to pass the time, and it's serious business there. And so, I grew up as an athlete, and I love competing. So I was involved in track and field, and love running summer track. And with that, I got a chance to travel all over the country and meet some amazing people and do some pretty cool things. And at one point, I was nationally ranked, believe it or not, in my event. Yeah, loved basketball and football, and got a lot of awards and recognition doing those kinds of things. And on the academic side as well, I was almost a straight A student, got great grades, and wanted to be the best in whatever it is that I was involved in, and always had people pushing me along the way. And had a lot of support from my family. The neighborhood that we grew up in wasn't the greatest neighborhood in the world, and I was always the nerdy skinny kid. And my older brother, he was always pushing me to be tough. My dad was always present, and he was the one that kind of showed me the impact that your presence can have on someone. You don't have to say a whole lot of words, but just being there meant a lot. And my mom was my biggest cheerleader. And she was the one that would tell me, I can do anything. And she was always there for me. And no matter where I was, it could have been a crowd of 100, hundreds of people in a stadium somewhere. I can always hear her screaming for me over anyone else. And so she really helped develop in me this delusional optimism that I can do anything, which served me very well as a kid. And I would say coming into my senior year or so, I don't know if that optimism necessarily worn off, that was always there, but I suddenly became more aware of where I was in the world and aware of how I fared against others. And for whatever reason, I started comparing myself to a lot of different people. And I noticed a lot of the kids, as we grew up in athletics, puberty hit, and all of a sudden they're 15 years old with a full goatee and like rippling muscles, and that just wasn't me. But still was able to compete, but started to get into my head a little bit, and doubting myself, and had a couple of run-ins with different adults and coaches who would scream at you and almost belittle you a little bit. That's not really my style. I didn't really resonate with that. And so as I graduated high school, kind of left that achievement phase, and I'll say the second chapter would be pursuit. I found myself in the search of something. At the time, I didn't really necessarily know what it was. I had questions about, faith and about God, and I started wanting to know more. And even at a young age, I found myself just being interested in and concerned about starting a family, and would I even, be good enough to be a good dad or be a good husband, and all those different things. I also started on the academic side, started to figure out pretty quickly what it is that I wanted to do, and I started pursuing that. So I remember the first video game console we had was the old school Nintendo. And I remember playing Super Mario Brothers, and I was like, yeah, that's it. I want to make video games. And so I started on this quest to say, okay, well, if you want to make video games, like, well, what do you have to study in order to do that? And so I figured out it was computer programming. I was like, okay, well, I want to be a programmer because I want to make games. I got into to LSU and majored in computer science, and programming was really hard for me. It wasn't something that I took to right away. Logic always came easy, math came easy, but for some reason the syntax of a language was just a foreign concept to me. I didn't understand that computers really weren't as smart as I thought they were, right? Like it will only do what you tell it to do and nothing else. And so I struggled quite a bit. And so I found myself um, I felt at least behind from a lot of other kids, right? So a lot of kids were in these computer science classes at LSU, and they've taken classes in their high schools, and this was my first time ever doing anything like that. So it was a lot of trying to get up to speed and trying to prove to myself that I can do this. And so after college, my wife and I got married right after school, no jobs. I wouldn't recommend doing that. But we started our young family, and I started my career right after that. It was almost like I arrived. And so as I started going through my career, I started learning, and I would say maybe chapter 3 would probably be revelation. And I say revelation in the sense that I started to realize how things really work. Like I started to realize what it meant to have a family and to lead a family. Finally, I started to realize what it was like in the quote unquote real world to be a professional developer. I started realizing things about myself. I started realizing that I was a little bit more capable than I thought I was. I realized that I had a lot of insecurities. There were things about myself that I realized that I didn't like and that I wouldn't dare admit. Just in general, there's a lot of things that I started understanding. It was almost like when Dorothy in the Wizard of Oz and she peeks open that curtain and she realizes, how things really are. That's kind of how I felt. I feel like I'm in the tail end of revelation. Like I feel like there's still a lot of things that I'm realizing about myself and the world. And I'll say the last 2 chapters are still unwritten. So we'll see what those happen to look like.
Super cool. I like the chapter of revelation and realizing insecurities that you have. And once you realize the insecurities you have, you also realize that the majority of humanity is in the same boat.
Absolutely.
Everyone's got insecurities.
Mm-hmm.
I've met the most confident, overconfident, crazy people that, know how to speak to anybody in a room. But then you talk to them one to one, and then they tell you all the insecurities that you have, and you're like, hang on, your external facade will say is completely different to what I pictured you to be. But then you realize everyone's got their own demons. Everyone's got things that they're concerned and scared and worried about.
Yep.
At the end of the day, only human to be like that, right? So, we have a common humanity, and sometimes I think the grass is always greener on the other side when you think, that person has this, I don't have that. But at the end of the day, it's all puts and takes. You got to work with what you got and realize that the majority of us, specifically fortunate to live in the West at this time, we have it pretty good.
Yeah.
We've got to make do with all the opportunities that we've been given thus far.
Absolutely.
I also liked how you broke down achievement versus pursuit and the importance of upbringing and the importance of family. And similar to you, I actually got married straight out of college as well. And we started our family young, and it's tough, and there's a lot of growing up and a lot of maturing that you kind of have to do when you leave home. Will leave all of this stuff, and there's no book or no training manual that kind of prepares you for that stuff.
Absolutely.
And you make so many mistakes, and if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. So,
Absolutely.
like, I remember one of my funniest memories is when I got my first place. I moved out of home when I was 20 years old, and I didn't know that you had to call the electricity company to get the power connected. This was on a Friday afternoon in Melbourne. Melbourne is like a 12-hour drive away from Sydney, which is where I grew up. So about an hour flight. Anyway, so I get the keys to this place on a Friday afternoon, and I get into the apartment, and I realized there's no power, so I called the power company, and they're like, "Oh, we need 2 business days
Ah,
notice to
oh,
send somebody, so we'll see you on Wednesday." Um, so I went to the supermarket. I had to go buy some candles. Thankfully,
mm-hmm.
there was gas in the place, so I could cook some stuff.
Yeah.
But I had 5 days of cold showers and no electricity, and
Oh yeah.
I was trying to. So it didn't kill me. It was character building,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a funny memory. But it goes to show you like nothing really prepares you for life. You kind of have to go through the things that you have to go through,
Yeah.
and as long as you have that grit about you, you can kind of pursue and do anything you want to do.
Absolutely. It's one of those things too where just like you said, like no one teaches you these things, right? Like you have this, at least for me, like I had this unrealistic understanding of the world and what it took to survive. And we just found out things as we went. We dealt with different things and just like you mentioned, simple things like getting your electricity turned on. Like no one talks about that, right? And there's a lot of things that we did, again, just mistakes that we made and growing up, just as a young family, that it just happened on the fly. And to everyone else it seemed like, at least to your parents and that generation, it's like, oh yeah, it's obvious. And the whole time I'm thinking, well, why didn't you tell me these obvious things, right? So, but it was interesting, but it was a challenge and a lot of fun learning as you went.
One of the things I think about, and I'd love to get your perspective on this,
Hmm.
is experience for kids. You have 4 kids,
Hmm.
which is a huge congratulations. I don't know how you do it, and you look super young. Someone with 4 kids, let me tell you. Um, but one of the things I think about is, with the way the world is changing, I have a 10-year-old,
Mm,
and, she's got, versus the childhood I had, she's got a lot more than what I had when I was
sure,
10 years old, right?
sure.
But how do you prepare your kids for the future that is coming? How do you prepare your kids to obviously be lifelong learners, but how do you kind of teach them grit when they didn't necessarily or don't have to struggle as hard as we did, or maybe our parents did before us and our grandparents before us? So
Yeah,
I'm interested to see how do you kind of discern or not teach, but at least give the perspective to your kids that, the rosy colored glasses that they may have, or how everything is so easy now,
hmm,
what isn't always going to be the case when they're on their own.
yeah. That's a great question. I feel like we are still figuring it out. So we've been parents for 17 years now. I can't believe it. My oldest daughter just had a birthday Sunday. My wife and I, we talk about this all the time. Like we feel like in the beginning we tried to give the girls a lot of what we didn't have. And I think a lot of it too was we probably went overboard, right? Because we were subconsciously or maybe even consciously trying to undo some of the things that we experienced or protect them from some of the pitfalls that we fell into just, growing up. And I feel like now we're making a course correction to try to bring a little bit more balance there, where we allow them to experience some hurt and disappointment, a little bit more, because I feel like that's very useful for growing up. And like you said, building grit and helping them understand that life isn't fair all the time, and that's okay. Some of it for us is, again, allowing them to fail, allowing them to make mistakes, within reason. We talk to them a lot about meeting new people, opening themselves up to different cultures, and so they can understand. At least here in the United States, I feel like we have this view of the world that's very unrealistic, right? It's our view of the world from the United States. It's almost like the rest of the world is like the U.S., but that's not the case. Trying to get them exposed to other people and other cultures that have a different worldview, and I think that helps a lot too. And one of the things that we always try to lean into with them is values of faith, just good family values in general. Like I feel like those things will never go out of style, and they'll help you no matter what age you're in. Being kind to people and sharing and genuinely having concern for other folks, and that kind of thing. So we definitely try to lean into the basics. The world that'll be here 10 years from now, it's already changing so fast, and there's no way for us it's hard for us to predict what that's going to look like. A lot of those core values we definitely try to hone in on and develop in them, because I feel like that's going to serve them no matter what.
One of the things I'm trying to instill in my daughter is financial responsibility. She's 10 years old, but
Oh, absolutely.
she's used to grandparents and extended families that enormously spoils her anything that she wants, right? So and I don't want to be a no dad, like no to everything. So we got her it's called Busy Kid, and there's lots of other versions of this.
Okay.
But it's basically like a debit card. You deposit your their pocket money in there, and then anytime we go out to shopping or for a coffee or whatever, if you buy something, it's kind of like, okay, you've saved up your pocket money, use your money, right? Like you have a debit card, you can do it. You can buy whatever you want, manage your own money. It's not my job. But that ever since we started doing that, she's just become a bit more conscious of dollars and cents and the impact that it has on her bank balance.
Absolutely.
Not just my credit card. So I think we have a lot of these tech tools out there to help people along, or to help children along. And I think financial literacy specifically is not something that is well taught at school, if taught
Absolutely.
at all, and then decide to do finance. So yeah, we're trying to instill that as well.
Yeah,
Anyway,
that's a great idea. Yeah.
Let's pivot to Startup Bus.
Okay.
Let's talk about Startup Bus. What is Startup Bus, and how'd you get involved?
Yeah, so Startup Bus is usually an annual competition, and the best way I can describe it is part hackathon, part entrepreneurial boot camp, a little bit of Shark Tank, and it all happens on a bus. And what happens is typically there's a selection process, and developers and UX designers and project managers, or just general technologists and entrepreneurs, they apply to be a part of a competition where essentially what you're tasked to do is come up with an idea and create a working prototype, working software in 3 days. Usually you are grouped together with complete strangers. And like last year's competition, that's the last time we had it in 2022. We had, I believe, 5 buses, different parts of the U.S., and there was a bus coming from Mexico. And folks came in from all over to join one of those buses. And what happens is teams are formed, and you pitch for your idea to get selected, and you try to form teams, and then you have the next 3 days where you're traveling across the U.S. to the host city, and you're literally that very little internet connection, and there's so many challenges along the way. It's hot, you're hungry, and all these kind of things, and you're trying to get a product done. The first 6 months or so, think of building a startup. A lot of that is simulated on the bus, and then what happens after that? You get into your host city. You have 2 days for a competition where you're pitching in front of other Startup Bus alum like yourself, or there may be VCs there who are interested in looking to fund the business, and then there's a winner declared. I tell you, for me at least, it was one of the best things I've ever done professionally and personally. But yeah, we'll get into that, but I'll stop right there.
No, for me, it's obviously the competition. And I did it back in 2014 when I had been a career corporate person for 6+ years, and I thought I knew it all.
Yep.
And I did Startup Bus in Australia, the first competition when it happened in Australia back in 2014. And then, like in neuroplasticity or neuroscience, they talk about rewiring your brain. In those 3 days, my brain was rewired completely.
Yep.
Because you learn that you can make decisions very fast. And if you are put in a high pressure environment to do those decisions, to make decisions that actually matter, your brain process all of this stuff.
Yep.
And it's not for everyone. Not everyone can live on adrenaline for 3 days straight, or 4 or 5 days straight, or like 2-3 hours of sleep. But once you go through that process, you can effectively supercharge your decision-making process.
Absolutely.
For anything and everything. So that's part one. Part two, one of the most fascinating things about this for me has been the community
Mm-hmm.
around startup, in the sense that, most of the people that are involved are volunteers,
Mm-hmm.
and they're doing it out of the kindness of their hearts. And, anytime I've rung up anyone from the community to help me with something, it's always been yes, and this
Yeah.
is what you should also do. Firstly, they're just crazy people to begin with.
Yep.
Everybody who, you know, they go through the neuroplasticity rewiring of their brain, and most people are super kind and helpful.
Mm-hmm.
But then it's also this, amazing group of people that actually want to make a change. So
Absolutely.
it's, yeah, and anybody who's gone through this competition, and I highly recommend anyone who's done any form of technical work from a dev point of view,
Mm-hmm.
and involved in anything to do with digital or technology, must go through this process.
Yeah.
Because if you don't go through this process, you will be just another one of those, just another developer, just
Yep.
another UX designer,
Yep.
just another one of those people that doesn't necessarily understand how quickly and efficiently you can actually build product
Yep.
and actually solve problems, and then also be part of a really cool community
Yeah.
as well.
Just like your experience earlier, you're talking, we're very similar in that regard too. Like my past, my working career was all corporate America. It was 100% Fortune 500 companies. And so I went on the bus in 2018. And a friend of mine, she got her way on the bus, and she's not technical at all. So a good friend of our family, Najala Thompson, she's awesome. She's a great friend. She's a serial entrepreneur. She got on the bus, and she got her invite, and she told me about it. She's like, "Hey, Brian, I think this is going to be great, and I was told I can invite somebody, and here's my invite. You should apply." I'm like, "Okay." So I look it up, and I see everything they're going to be doing, and you're probably going to make apps and all this kind of stuff, and business and a product in 3 days. And immediately I was just like intimidated. I'm like, I don't know if I can do anything like that. And I know I can build software, but I don't know if I can do anything in 3 days. And I've never done anything outside of my company. Like I've never built a product that was public facing or anything like that. And to me, that's a whole different animal. So I get in, and the folks that were doing the interviews, I let them know, look, I do know how to code. I don't At the time, I knew nothing about React. I knew nothing about Angular. I knew nothing about those types of technologies. Can I still apply? And I want to try. So I get on the bus. I'm part of a team. One of the members of our team at the time was the one of the principal engineers over at Tesla. And I'm just like, what in the world? Who like how do you find these people? And so yeah, so I get on the bus, and there's no way I'm gonna learn. We chose, Angular for our product, for our language, our framework. There's no way I'm gonna learn Angular in a couple of hours to be effective. So like, okay, how can I be effective with this particular competition? So I was like, well, I know I can serve, right? So I know enough about software development where I can help our engineer. His name was Harvey. I can help Harvey, talk through some things or get him what he needs, and I can help the person that's going to be doing our pitch. I can help them perfect what they're doing, and all that kind of things. I can be a runner. I can be a project manager, like all those things. And just like you said, MTS, I was shocked at how quickly you can really build things. And because again, going back even to school, when I was in computer science there, our programming language was C. And it was time to do an assignment at school, it was a blank blue screen and just white text. Like you just started from scratch and you just started cranking out code. So in my mind, I could not conceptualize how you can actually build a legitimate product from scratch. And I found out that, I mean, nobody's really doing this from scratch, right? Like I found out what Twilio was, and how a lot of the messaging platforms, back in the day, the underpinnings of that a lot of times was the Twilio technology, and it was just kind of repackaged and white labeled and sold somewhere else. And I learned about all these different APIs, and these frameworks were there, and these different tricks of the trade. And I had to suppress my corporate need to make sure that everything had to be perfect in a certain way before you can ship. And I understood that good enough is okay. A lot of times I was just blown away that at the end of it we were able to make something, not that seemed like it worked, like it actually worked. And I was just my mind was just blown, and just like you said, like your brain was rewired into what's possible. And I came away with that with a brand new confidence. It wasn't necessarily like I've never been like the greatest coder in the world. I've been pretty good, but I came away with the confidence knowing that I can't guarantee you that I'm going to be, the best in the world or I'll get this in, a week. I do know that given the right amount of time, I can do anything. And so I started leaning into that, a little bit more. And as a result, I've always wanted to do things on my own and kind of, have my own company and build products for clients. But it was, fear that kind of kept me from doing that. And after the startup bust, I told myself, because I always had people come up to me and they knew that I coded and they were always, "Hey, Brian, I have this app idea and, could you help out?" And I always declined. So I said, okay, the next time someone comes to me with an idea and I think it's interesting, I'm going to tell them yes. And I have no idea how I'm going to do it, but I know that I can figure it out. And so, yeah, so that's what happened. So a couple years later, someone approached me about an idea that they had, and I said yes, and I'm actually finishing up that product right now. So and I've never maybe I would have done it, but maybe it would have taken me another 10 years to get ready to or feel like I'm ready to do it. But yeah, Startup Bus really turbocharged that for me and gave me the confidence, like saying, just rewired my brain to think a little bit differently and how to get things done.
Which is a great segue to the next question, which is about, how do highly technical people such as yourself transition into leadership positions, right? Because it sounds like, out of Startup Bus, it wasn't just learning hacks or just learning how, the internet is basically a giant pivot table with multiple API calls, just, leveraging data from different sources.
Yeah.
It's also learning that solving problems is probably the thing that we get paid for rather than
Yep.
just understanding the technology. So, how have you made that transition and what advice would you give to, highly technical people to become leaders within their space?
I would say so. I've seen developers become leaders a couple of different ways. I'll tell you the first way I've seen it's, in my opinion, it's a little unhealthy. I've seen developers as they progress in their career because they're really good at what they do. Their leadership automatically assumes that the next role for them, the next level for them is leadership. And that's not necessarily the case. Because you're a great developer does not mean that you're a great leader. There are two completely different skill sets. So I think that's one tip for any leaders that are involved. Definitely consider a different approach when you're looking for leadership in your dev groups. For those developers who are looking to become leaders, I think, especially in the dev space, I do think it's critical for you to be excellent at what you do. One, you need to understand what your team is going through. Not that you need to tell them how to do it, but you need to be able to empathize with them. You need to be able to help them see some of the blind spots that maybe that they don't know they have. So being excellent at what you do, I think, is critical, especially for these highly technical roles. And a lot of times, to be honest, the folks that are really good at their jobs from a technical standpoint, they a lot of times don't respect leadership, that don't understand them, that can't speak their language, right? So it's kind of dual purpose there. And then the last thing I would say is, if you do want to become a leader and you are in that technical role, I think you have to lean into to serving. Service has to be, paramount to what it is that you're doing. For me, I had this idea of serving as, whenever a problem came up or whenever my team was struggling with something, my idea was of serving was to put on my Superman cape, jump in and solve the problem for them, right? And I was thinking that I was removing roadblocks for them, and once it was done, they could continue with their work, and I pat myself on the back, say, "Great job, leader," and kind of move on. And I remember my director at the time, his name is Mark. I still talk to Mark today. We talk about ideas and I get his advice on different things. He told me, he said, "Hey, Brian, you are holding your team back." Like, what do you mean holding my team back? He said, "Yeah, you are robbing them the ability to learn." And that really hit me, because I never want to be the reason why someone isn't progressing or someone isn't, getting better. And man, he told me, he said, "Well, how did you get good at what you're doing? Like, how did you learn? There were problems that you had to solve and no one did them for you, and you had to struggle a little bit. And then that's how you learned. And he said that, could you do a better job at what they're doing? Probably. Would it be easier? Probably, because you know the system more than they do. That doesn't mean that you're smarter than they are. You have more domain knowledge, and your role is to set the parameters, make sure they don't fall off the cliff, but allow them to make mistakes. And then you have to be comfortable with solutions that you may not necessarily 100% agree with. If it does the job, then it's probably okay, and let it go and kind of let them make their own path. That was one of the things that I had to learn. And it wasn't until when he said that to MTS, I realized that I created this codependency that I never intended. And I found myself barely taking any PTO because I felt like my team needed me, or if I did take PTO, I was constantly getting calls. And that was a sign to me that I wasn't doing a great job of being a leader. Like I was creating dependence instead of autonomous developers who could make their own decisions and had the confidence to go out there and make mistakes and learn. And so that was something that I had to learn early on.
That transition you make in your career from being like an individual contributor to like a team lead is a daunting one, especially if you're one of those people that I don't want to say if you're a perfectionist, but if you hold a very high standard
Hmm.
of your own work and you don't see that being translated by the people that necessarily report to you,
Hmm.
it's very hard not to get your fingers into the weeds and like, make sure that everything is perfect. I had to
Yeah.
learn that myself. Like, I was double, triple checking my team's work all the time
Mm.
and, basically micromanaging everything. And yeah, they didn't necessarily take responsibility because I was meddling in everything.
Right.
And then, yeah, stunted their growth. And then
Hmm.
I had to learn, and similar to yourself, I was overworking myself,
Hmm.
not, instead of letting the team manage the work and me manage, strategy and
Hmm.
business objectives. I was working way too hard and not necessarily doing my job properly, and I
Hmm.
was doing my team's job instead. So taking that step back, being okay with most things being at 80 to 90% and not
Hmm.
always at 100% is such a hard transition to make
Hmm.
when you've grown up succeeding or achieving very high marks at
Yep.
school or very high quality of work as an individual contributor, and then you come to being a manager and you're like, oh, I have to be okay with 85% of the guy, even though, he's trying his best, he's doing his thing,
Yeah.
but not to my standard, but like I can't lose my life and lose my time
Hmm.
um, by perfecting other people's work. So it's a
Yeah.
hard transition. You got to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I feel like too, it's one of those things where we're taught in school one thing, and then again, you get into the real world and you have this revelation that just things don't work that way. And like you said, sometimes 80% or 85% is amazing. But 80% in school is not. So like it's weird how that works. And it's almost like you go through the education process and then you have to wake yourself up and teach yourself, and you have to learn like a brand new way of doing things. And that was definitely interesting for me.
Have you ever had to manage? It's called an abhorrent genius. Somebody who's like ultra smart at what they do, but they're a complete a-hole. Um, like, you know, um,
Yes.
I've had, tell me about that because I'm sure everyone goes through that at some point in their career. I'll share a story too, but tell me about what it's like managing a high performing crazy person.
Yeah, it's so what I found with, and I know exactly what you're saying with those. I feel like for me the approach is a lot different. Well, if I have someone who is high performing and they may be a little rough around the edges personality wise, my thing with them is I do want to understand what their motivation is, and why they do what it is that they're doing. A lot of times it's they enjoy being on top, if that makes sense. Like they enjoy being the 0.01% of technologists out there that are involved in what they're doing, and that's definitely admirable. For them, a lot of times it's honestly it's protecting them. And it's not anything that you necessarily that you say, but it's trying your best to make sure that they have the space to live in their creative genius. That's what I mean by protecting. It's blocking the requests that are coming in and trying to make sure that they can be heads down and they can be hyper focused on what it is that they're doing. Sometimes it's just sitting and letting them vent about frustrations that they have, because a lot of people don't understand their world and they don't understand what it's like to be them, and they don't understand the level of genius that they're putting into their work. And so sometimes it's acknowledging, like truly acknowledging the work that they're doing. It's getting involved and, hey, show me, I want to see this code. Like, show me what it is that you're doing, so that you can really understand and appreciate that. And they need to know that you know that they're amazing, right? So
Yeah.
that's what I found with dealing with those. And so yeah, I'll let you go ahead and tell your story.
Yeah, a similar kind of thing. I had the pleasure of working with someone like that who, from an output point of view, was delivering the work of 10 people hands down,
Hmm.
right? Like the next 10 people that were working would not provide the same level of output as this person,
Yeah.
but I could not put this person in a room with anyone else, right?
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
I could manage him and protect him
Hmm.
and shield him and kind of do the interpersonal work on his behalf.
Right.
But putting him in an audience, he would just literally tell everyone else that they were stupid and they had no idea what they were doing. And his idea was the best idea. Unfortunately, every time he opened his mouth, it was the best idea.
Hmm.
But you know, it's just the interpersonal skills weren't there,
Yeah.
and you know, there's only so much coaching, feedback, blah, that you can give to someone.
Yeah.
For some of these people, is it's just a little bit too much, right?
Yeah.
So if you do get that blessing of managing someone, I call it a blessing because I actually
Absolutely.
like working with
Absolutely.
people at that caliber. But yeah, you just got to completely change your management style
Yep.
and work with them and work for them
Hmm.
in some capacity, rather than just try and make them fit into your generic like middle manager or individual contributor type archetype from an employee. But yeah, super interesting and
Yeah.
super fun.
Hey, Imtiaz, quick question. Have you ever, I'm not sure if you're into sports or basketball, but have you ever seen the Netflix series The Last Dance?
Yeah, I want to say I've watched the first half of the series, but yes, tell me.
Okay. So second towards the second half of that series, they get into Dennis Rodman. And if you're familiar with Dennis Rodman, he's this super eclectic character, and he has this wild lifestyle, but just excellent at rebounding, defense, and one of the people that truly gives you everything that he has. And the coach of the Chicago Bulls, Phil Jackson, he talked about that. And I remember when he came in, Michael Jordan was, to me, the greatest player that has ever lived. He was against, getting Rodman on board, and he was just, so different. And the way Phil Jackson managed him, cared for him, was completely different than everyone else. Like, he gave him his space and he let him be himself. Long story short, once Dennis realized that Coach Jackson was going to let him be himself, he gave everything that he had to the team to win. And if he wasn't there, there's no way they would have won those championships. So yeah, to me, those types of developers, technologists, they remind me a lot of Dennis Rodman. They are excellent at what they do. They might be different than the rest of the team, but extremely valuable. And you definitely have to let them be themselves. And like you said, don't try to change them.
No, very cool. So, talking about hyper productive, hyper smart people, what's your kind of process for learning new things and applying them in what you do?
Yeah, so for me, I have the tendency of, if I'm trying to learn something new, I want to consume as much content as I can in the beginning. And my friends are probably tired of hearing me say this, but I always talk about learning Spanish. Started in 2020, learning Spanish, and I've always had this goal to be able to speak. And one of those things, you just kind of put off and you never put any attention to it. And at the time, I consumed as much content as I could. There's so much out there, and there's the good, the bad, and there's things that don't work and things that work for you, but I want to consume it all. From that, I usually can start recognizing the patterns of what truth looks like. So there's one school of thought that says that, oh, you don't ever need to pick up a grammar book and you just need to immerse yourself in the language. And there's others that say, no, before you say a word, you need to know all of the grammatical structures. And the truth is somewhere in between that, right? And so usually I start recognizing what the patterns, really are. And I kind of hyper focus on that. And then I start trying to understand what resonates with me. So what ways of learning are really aligned with my energy, and so I can make it seem like it's effortless. And so for me, once I get that and kind of realize the patterns there, after that I am setting a goal. I am time boxing myself. I want to make sure I'm hyper specific. Once I feel like I've found the content. For me, I found this platform. It's called baselang.com. You can get on and talk to native speakers, and you can have it's all one-on-one sessions, and you can either do classes of grammar, or you can have conversations. And for me, I didn't realize the thing that I needed was the conversational, part. For me, I needed a little bit of structure, so I signed up for classes. I time boxed myself based on the budget that I had. I was like, all right, I'm gonna give. I have 2 months to get this done. So what do I need to do? And then I'm researching. If I have 2 months and my goal is to be able to have a 30-minute conversation with a native speaker, how much time do I need to put into this in order to get this to work? And so then I figured out I needed 2 hours a day. And so after that, it was eliminating everything else in my life other than my family and my job, business, and really putting the time in to do that. And so anyway, I did that. 6 weeks later, I was able to accomplish my goal, and I was able to have a 30-minute conversation with someone completely in Spanish. It was the weirdest thing in the world, because it was, of course, it's possible. There are people that speak all kinds of languages, but it's because you're not doing it. It's like, man, I wonder, what is this possible for me, and what is it going to be like for me? So actually living that was fantastic. And so once I got out of that, usually when I'm out of that time box, that hyper focused period of time, I usually like to set micro habits that I can sustain, for forever, right? So now for me, it's consuming 30 minutes of Spanish, every day, and I'm constantly listening to podcasts or learning different things. And so now I just do most of it in Spanish. And so that way I can continue the things that I like doing and continue learning things. But at the same time, I'm continuing my Spanish as well. So anytime I get a chance to have a conversation with somebody, I usually raise my hand to do that, because I love it. So, but yeah,
That's a
that's a little
big
bit how I learn.
no, but the question, a lot of people that I come interact with, especially from corporate, and when they have like startup aspirations and ideas, and they're like, oh, it's too hard,
Mm,
I can't do it, or blah blah blah. And I'm like, how much do you really want it,
yeah.
right? And what you've kind of just demonstrated is you really wanted to learn Spanish,
Hmm.
and you really wanted to get it done, and you did. So a lot of the time, people say that they want to get fit,
Hmm.
they want to wait, they want to do this, they want to do that, but they're not focused. They
Yeah.
just say things because it's the right thing to say rather than dedicating the time and energy to achieving those goals.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
Incredible. Very cool. So this leads me to the raging topic of our times right now, which is generative AI and all the craziness that's surrounding generative AI. How are
Mm.
you looking at Gen AI? And what are some of the applications that you're thinking about in terms of your day to day now?
Yeah. So I am fascinated with the idea of having a tool to just make life easier, whether it's work, whether it's at home. I've been so fascinated, Imteaz, with talk about like Chat GPT. I use it just about every single day. Like, I think of it as my new little assistant. I tell my people, yeah, it's my new best friend. And there's so many different applications out there. Like, honestly, sometimes it's overwhelming, the possibilities. And so for me, at least, when I have so many different options in my mind, it can definitely just like freeze you. And so I started out using it just because I wanted to understand. It had nothing to do with building systems or building products or incorporating it into technology that I was building or anything like that initially. Initially, it was how can I take what I'm already doing, either in my job or at home, and make it better. So, for instance, if it takes me 2 hours to do a task and I can do it in 10 minutes with ChatGPT, then yeah, let's do that. And let me figure out how to use it for that. Quick story, my oldest daughter, she was a junior last year. She started taking chemistry. Throughout her entire career, she's been a AB student, and she has made good grades in school pretty easily for her. One day I was working, kind of finishing up. She came home. She's like, "Hey, Dad, I got to tell you something." She was like, "What?" I got a D in chemistry. I'm like, okay, got a D in chemistry. So again, that's odd. She's made A's and B's, for forever. So I'm asking a bunch of questions, trying to understand what is this that she's not getting. And so she seems like, at least when we're talking, she seems like she has a good understanding of concepts in general and things like that. And I'm like, okay. And I started digging into a little bit more of what her process was for studying. And I found out that she did not know how to study. So what she was doing, what she would do with all her classes was the day before, she just kind of review everything. It's like, all right, close the book up, roll in the class, and make an A on a test. So I was like, well, you can't really do that with chemistry, right? Like you have to like study and that kind of thing. Anyway, she was on like a spring break and we had like a week. I said, look, this is what we'll do. We'll take this next week. I'll show you how to study, why we want to do it that way. And I'm going to show you how to use ChatGPT. I know y'all keep hearing me, talk about this, and you're probably tired of hearing me talk about it, but you're going to learn. So start up an account and let's get going. So I opened it up and I was like, all right, ChatGPT, you are an expert in high school chemistry, and I need you to teach me about XYZ topic, whatever she was learning. And it kind of broke it down for her. And she was like, okay, well, that's pretty cool. I was like, all right, so now ChatGPT, I need you to create for me a 3-question quiz. I'm going to answer the questions. Tell me that I'm right or wrong in the character and personality of, and then I named this character from My Hero Academia. It's an anime that she likes, and it did, and she got a big kick out of it. And she took my computers. Okay, she started asking questions, and kind of based on some of the things that she was learning. And over the next week, she started studying alongside of ChatGPT, asking it to break down concepts for her, explain things different ways. And she did that over the next like month or so. And then every test that she had thereafter, she made an A. She made an A on every test, on every quiz, and she finished the semester. She had a final on her, an A on her final exam, and she finished the class with a B, a couple of points away from an A. And it was, to her, it was mind blowing. To me, it was mind blowing. And so for me, finding worthy problems or like things that you're passionate about, like I'm passionate about my kids. So how can I use this to help them out? And so I was already a believer anyway, but finding something that was important to me and really using that there, it motivated me and opened my mind up to other possibilities about things. And so now I'm looking for different ways to incorporate it in other areas of my personal life and then also with work as well.
That's amazing. Like in terms of personalized learning, each kid, each person learns very, very differently.
Yeah.
And we don't have enough teachers in this world to give one-on-one service to each and every student we have, right?
Yeah.
So having this as a supplemental aid in terms of the learning journey
Absolutely.
is insanely powerful,
Absolutely.
right? Like this personalizing down to, what are your gaps, right? Which is a very efficient way of learning any topic, I guess.
Yeah.
Very cool. Okay. So on a personal front, Brian, what are like some productivity hacks that you use in your life to make your life easier? As a busy dad and as a busy professional, I'm sure you've got many.
Yeah, so kind of go back to my previous example. Like I love skill stacking. So usually, if I'm learning something, it's not something that I'm gonna use. It's a one-off thing. It's something that I'm gonna apply later on to something else that I'm learning. Like for instance, before my daughter came to me about her issue with chemistry, I was already learning about ChatGPT and understanding how it worked and understanding more about prompt engineering and for me, it's a way to apply that to other things in my life. Like for instance, I told you, learning Spanish, and I want to keep that up. So the skill that I learned with learning Spanish, I use that same skill now for other things. So I'm consuming Spanish content to learn other things, and so for me, it's important because, like you mentioned, my time is compressed. I don't have a ton of time. I have a large family and full-time job and an app that I'm building, and those are the things that I like to do. So if I can find a way to use the skills that I'm learning and what I'm doing already, if I can find a way to not take away from the time that I have already, those are the kind of things that I usually kind of look to do, and that's what helps me to stay productive and also to stay available to my family and work and things like that.
Very cool. Brian, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you today. How can people reach out to you? They want to learn more about you and all the crazy things that you get up to.
Yeah, so I'm not on TikTok and Instagram a whole lot, so probably the best way to get in contact with me is through LinkedIn. So just look for Brian Davis on LinkedIn. You'll see a nice AI generated picture of me smiling big and bright. I'm definitely not hard to find.
Very cool. Again, it was a pleasure chatting to you today, Brian. Thank you so much, and we'll speak again soon.
Thank you so much, Imteaz. I appreciate it.